for his shenanigans in this storyline. Hal, after getting some nice words from Jim Corrigan, who makes a quick trip to Earth to say that the bonding of Hal and the Spectre has been ordained by the presence, takes his leave of everybody else and flies off. But as Hal/Spectre flies off, he uses the power of the Spectre to instantly restore New York City. And he talks about how he is now the Spectre, the spirit of redemption. And the fact that he was able to use the power of the Spectre so easily to restore an entire city causes some concern for the heroes, particularly Batman. Okay, now things to take from this story that are significant for the Spectre's character development, as well as things that are historically significant. First off, there's the fact that the Spectre Force chooses its own host. And based on everything that came before, beginning with Morphin Comics 52, going right through the Ostrander Mandrake post-crisis origin for the Spectre, everything established that it was the Presence who chose the host for the Spectre. But here, clearly, the Presence does not appear to be involved in any way. And you can look at Jim Corrigan's words near the end of the story where he says that this union has been ordained by the Presence. And so you can say, well, you know what, it suited the Presence's best interests, and, you know, the Presence probably felt that Hal's soul did indeed deserve punishment, and so the Presence figured, well, that's why I have the Spectre. The Spectre is given missions by myself to punish the guilty, so the Spectre is simply fulfilling its mission. One could also say that perhaps Jeff Johns was trying to downplay a more religious, more divine aspect of the Spectre here. In fact, it is interesting to consider the fact that during his time as Green Lantern, it wasn't really established that Hal was a very spiritual person himself. One might assume that he was of a Christian background, given that he appeared in different Christmas stories, but I mean, Hal could really be of any religious denomination. Or maybe he wasn't religious at all. Who knows? I might as well talk about it now. There is the Parallax retcon / revelation, which comes at the end of Hal Jordan's time as a Spectre, in which it's revealed that Hal was not Parallax in so much that he was the host of the living entity of fear known as Parallax. And so even at this point in the story, when the Spectre chooses to bond with Hal, it could be suggested that given that Parallax was grafted onto Hal's soul and Hal was floating around inside the Spectre Force, perhaps at this point Parallax was already beginning to reach out and grab hold of, even seduce, the Spectre. And maybe Parallax's power was so strong that not even the Presence could intervene and prevent the joining of Hal and the Spectre. But certainly very different, and certainly when it comes to future incarnations of the Spectre, we will see the traditional telling in that the Presence chooses the next host. Something else important to point out is that Hal uses the power of the Spectre to fix something which has gone wrong, and this goes back to Hal's character development since Emerald Twilight and Zero Hour. Of course, he had that tragic downfall because he was going out taking such power by force and using that power to fix things which he saw as broken. And so one could look at Batman here at the end of the story and say, well, he kind of has a right to be concerned because, once again, Hal has immeasurable power, power which probably dwarfs the power that he had during his time as Parallax, and he's used it to undo something. Now, one could say that writers at DC didn't really want to spend time writing stories about how the heroes and the general populace got together and took time to rebuild New York City. This is a quick and easy fix, a way of moving on, showing stories with New York where everything is hunky-dory. But it shows here that even as he's made the transition to being the Spectre, Hal still has it in his mind that he should use the power available to him to fix things. And it's certainly something I'll be talking about in the next chapter or two, at least, of this particular episode. The last thing that really stands out to me about this storyline is Batman's view of Hal. Just the level of anger and resentment that he has for Hal, and it sets a precedent for future stories in which Hal interacts with Batman, or stories in which Hal is referred to in Batman's presence. And now, to be fair, earlier in the story, Wonder Woman also expresses her concern to Alan, who's quite good with the idea of Hal becoming the host of the Spectre. She expresses her concern that giving so much power to a known mass murderer is wrong. It's quite troubling. But hearing it coming from Diana, she sounds more diplomatic, more pragmatic. But when Batman enters the story and he voices his objections to Hal becoming the Spectre, you get a sense that he's got a lot of anger going on there. And it's important to keep in mind, this is a story that's unfolding a good 4 years before Identity Crisis. And that's a story in which I will argue is historically significant for the Spectre's character development, and that it explains a major reason why Batman has so much anger and resentment to Hal above all of the other heroes. But Jeff Johns gets the ball rolling here with this story, as on multiple occasions Batman tells everyone within earshot that this is wrong. Hal Jordan is psychotic, a mass murderer. He should have no right whatsoever to have a shot at redemption. And it's Alan who calls out Batman at one point and says, "What's the matter, Batman? Are you so angry because you see what the power has done to Hal, how it corrupted someone so innocent? Are you angry because you're actually afraid that so much power could corrupt you?" And now, if Alan was one of Batman's contemporaries, you have to know that Batman would have beaten Alan down. But given Alan's history as the original defender of Gotham City, as Thomas Wayne's boyhood hero, that's why Alan is able to call Batman out and not get any real response from Batman. All Batman can do is just stop talking. But it is important to keep in mind that in 1999, there was no Parallax retcon, so Hal was a known mass murderer at this time. So this was an interesting way of bringing the Spectre back. by taking a very troubled character, but troubled in a very different way from the previous host. Hal Jordan and Jim Corrigan, two very different characters. And so there is the question, as I bring this chapter to an end, as to whether Jeff Johns in 1999 actually wanted to bring Hal Jordan back as Green Lantern, realized that editorial would not allow him to do that, and so he came up with this story as a sort of a stepping stone towards bringing Hal back to his iconic role as Green Lantern. Not even the guys over at LanternCast seem to know the answer. If I ever meet Mr. Johns again, I'll make sure to ask him that and see if he can give me an answer one way or the other. But folks, I think I should wrap things up here. I know I spent a lot of time looking at Day of Judgment, but it is a historically significant story, especially since it introduces Hal Jordan as the Spectre. But things will move along quicker for part 2, which will come your way in a couple of weeks. We'll look at the Secret Files and Origins issue, which provide an epilogue for Day of Judgment. And we'll also start getting into stories that stand out in my mind from Hal's time as the Spectre. I'll take a look, an overview of the James DeMatteis, Ryan Sook volume of the Spectre. And within part 2, or most likely within part 3, we'll start looking at how Hal Jordan's time as the Spectre came to and then we'll finish off by looking at the legacy of the Hal Jordan Spectre. So some really interesting stuff to come your way, folks, with the next one or two installments of Comics and History. So in closing, you can email me at comicsandhistory@gmail.com. You can also go on over to the Facebook page and like the Comics and History Facebook page. Leave some feedback there. Get regular updates on upcoming releases of the show. So folks, until another 14 days have come and gone, let's say that this class is in recess.